Welcome to Take 5, your 5-minute inspirational message from Solid Rock Drogheda. I'm Nick Park, and very often I hear preachers make statements where I just want to say, hang on, that's not actually correct. And generally it's not talking about matters of doctrine or theology, but in their illustrations, there's a lot of things that people pick up and repeat that they've heard somebody else say. And one thing I've heard on a number of occasions, I've heard preachers talking about a French writer called Voltaire. You may have heard of him. He was a 17th century or 18th century French writer, philosopher, historian, a scientific experimenter, and I've heard people say, even the great atheist Voltaire said this. And in fact, Voltaire was never an atheist at all. He was certainly an opponent of organized religion, but he was not an atheist. François-Marie Arouet, he grew up in France, and he took the name Voltaire basically because I think he wanted to put some distance between himself and his family. His father wanted him to be a lawyer, and he basically went away supposedly to university to study law and wrote poetry instead. And he came up with his pen name Voltaire, which was taking in Latin. It took his last name and then the youngest, so Arouet Jr. in Latin. You take the letters of that, you jumble them up into an anagram, and you get Voltaire. And so he called himself Voltaire. And he was not actually an atheist. He was what's called a deist. Now, a deist is somebody who believes that there is a God, but they believe God doesn't have very much to do with what happens on the earth. Perhaps the best way to describe a deist is as being like an absentee landlord, or somebody who created a clock and then wound it up and leaves it ticking but doesn't interfere with it at all. So deists would basically believe that there is a God. I'll explain why in a moment, but they believe that there is a God, but they wouldn't believe, for example, that praying to God makes any difference, because they wouldn't believe God listens to our prayers. They wouldn't believe that God intervenes or does miracles, or they wouldn't even necessarily believe that God was good or was moral, but simply that there was a higher power that created the universe. And the creation of the universe would be the key thing why so many people like Voltaire were deists. Because you look at this world this world. I mean, they didn't know the stuff about the universe that we know now, but you look at this universe in all its complexity, and the idea that somehow came from nowhere, out of nothing, is just, it's basically impossible for most people to believe. And so that's why Voltaire was a deist. And he was quite clear that there was a God. He said that he believed in, for example, the brotherhood of men. He said the Jew, the Muslim, the pagan is my brother, because we're all created by the same God. Now, he did despise organized religion. He hated the church. He's most famous for a book that mocked a particular religious argument. The philosopher Leibniz had come up with the idea that the world that we're living in is the best of all possible worlds. That, in other words, that if people were saying, well, why would a good God create a world with so much evil in it? And Leibniz said, well, actually, this is the best of all possible worlds. Now, basically, it's okay to say that philosophically, and I think it's a fair argument, but the fact is, when you're in the midst of suffering, it's very hard to say this is the best of all possible worlds. Surely it'd be better if I wasn't suffering. And so Voltaire wrote a book called Candide. His most famous book was called Candide, or Optimism it was also called, and it was about this guy Candide who went through his life having all kinds of disasters happening to him, and whatever happens he says, this is the best of all possible worlds. So it was poking fun at that argument. And also as well, Voltaire did come up with he came up with a false idea that has been popularized even today, carried down into a novel such as the Da Vinci Code, where he said that, for example, the early church at the Council of Nicaea got rid of all other competing books and gospels and decided on what the books of the Bible are, which, by the way, is totally historical nonsense. There's absolutely not a shred of evidence in history for that. The Bible, the books of the Bible, came about through the early church choosing quite naturally and organically really the books that were most valuable for understanding more about Jesus. But even Voltaire had to admit that there were some things about Christianity were great. He famously said that his servants, people said, do you want to do away with Christianity altogether? He said, no, because basically with my servants, the only thing that stops them stealing my silver spoons is the fact that they believe in God and that God tells them not to steal. So he saw uses for Christianity. And Voltaire also did believe that the greatest thing on earth was the sacrifice of Christians who cared for others. He wasn't talking about the hierarchy of the church, but he was talking about mainly about women, Christian women who would work as nurses and would give their lives and even sometimes die during pandemics through caring for the sick. And he said that was the greatest good in all the earth. And in the end, when you look at Voltaire, he made a big fuss about the problem of evil. Why is there evil in the world? But I think the bigger problem that Voltaire should have faced is, why is there good in the world? If God isn't active, if God isn't changing us, if God isn't making us to be the people that he wants us to be, why would the greatest good in the earth be the Christians who give their lives to serve others? And perhaps that is Voltaire's greatest legacy to us today. God bless you today. Join us again tomorrow for another Take 5, your 5-minute inspirational message from Solid Rock Drogheda.